This is going to help you annotate the poem War Photographer. Now there are 2 poems called War Photographer being used by exam boards, so it's really important that if you Google this poem for extra information that you put War Photographer Edexcel into the search engine, because there is another poem called War Photographer by Caroline Duffy which is in the AQA anthology, so do check that it's the correct one so that you don't end up confusing yourself. Right, the context for this poem is that it was written in 1987, that the writer was somebody who was very interested in social issues, and at the time of writing there are lots of major conflicts going on around the world, although not in the UK or in the US, which are the 2 countries that the writer is associated with. Nonetheless, she was very conscious of what was going on elsewhere, and that was perhaps added to by the fact that, as it says in the corner here, 24-hour rolling news coverage had just got going. So stations like CNN, News 24, those sorts of channels had just got going with their continual news programmes. And for the first time, people were watching lots and lots and lots of news and could watch it all day long, as opposed to half an hour at 6 in the evening and perhaps again at 10. And that meant that news programme makers were sending correspondents all over the world to report in detail on conflicts that perhaps would have got a couple of minutes in a half-hour programme once a fortnight. Suddenly they were getting big chunks of time devoted to them. And for the first time, British and American people were seeing detailed, continuous footage of what was going on in these war zones, often in cities in which people were living and trying to go about their daily life while being bombed and shot at. And it was very shocking, really, to see these detailed and regular images being beamed all over the world. The story of the poem is that the poet takes on a persona of a photographer, so it's not an autobiographical poem at all. She's adopted this character, and she takes on the persona of a photographer who sometimes works on happy, peaceful domestic jobs at home, and sometimes this photographer is sent to a war zone. And in her dramatic monologue, you can see we've said the style is a dramatic monologue. In the dramatic monologue, the photographer makes the point that we're free to write our own stories about what goes on around the picture. So she takes a photograph, and the photograph is a moment frozen in time, and we as viewers of that picture are able to say to ourselves what we think was going on immediately before that photo was taken and what happens immediately afterwards. And what she says is that that can make us a little bit complacent. It can make us a bit not exactly uncaring, but not having to think too hard about what we're really seeing sometimes, because we can't see the full picture. It's written in free verse, so there are no rules, and the varied line and stanza length in the free verse means that the writer can be flexible with what they want to do with their lines and with their stanzas and with their rhyme schemes and those sorts of things. And that perhaps echoes the idea of us as viewers of the photographs being flexible, which is a very important word in the first line of the poem. Okay, so let's start having a look at the poem itself. And you can see that it begins with an alliteration on the F here, which emphasises the writer's point. The writer's point being what we've said already, that we can interpret what we want as the story outside the picture that we're shown. So we're able to be flexible, that's the key word, in our thinking about what's going on. The reassurance of the frame is flexible. You can think that just outside it people eat, sleep, love normally, while I seek out the tragic, the absurd, to make a subject. So here the writer juxtaposes normal life with the things that the war photographer looks for. Tragic things, absurd things, terrible things. So she's juxtaposing normality, happiness, getting on with your normal life, with dreadful things that she is supposed to find and photograph in order to be paid. And this juxtaposition is what the poem consists of all the way through. Or, she says, or if the picture's such as lifts the heart, so it's a cheerful picture, the firmness of the edges can convince you this is how things are. And you can see there's no full stop at the end of that stanza. And again, it reminds us that we don't see the whole thing. We can draw our own conclusions. And then she talks about Royal Ascot, which is a famous horse race, or set of races, that take place over several days in June. And they're really for the very rich to make a lot of money gambling, and they all dress up beautifully and drink champagne and that kind of thing. As when at Ascot once I took a pair of peach, sun-gilded girls rolling, silk crumpled on the grass in champagne giggles. So we have this lovely image of two slightly drunk, giggly girls in their very luxurious clothing as silk, and they're drinking champagne. So there's this you see this squiggly line here, so I've picked that up as language of beauty and luxury and wealth. Gilded means covered in gold, so that it's because it's sunny they look as if they're gold, their skin is gold, but at the same time we're reminded that it ties in with this language of luxury. And then she goes on to juxtapose the image of the girls at Ascot having fun and having a lovely time with a war zone, a story from a war zone. And the sort of anaphoric style here with the dash and the word as kind of emphasises the contrast and emphasises the juxtaposition. As last week, when I followed a small girl staggering down some devastated street, hip thrust out under a baby's weight. She saw me seeing her, my finger pressed. So you can see here that the start emphasises the contrast, and also with the wiggly lines here, I've picked out words that emphasise the difficulty, the struggle, the awful time that the girl is having. She's staggering. The street is devastated. It's been bombed to bits. She's carrying something heavy, which in this case happens to be a baby. So you can see the contrast, that juxtaposition is here again. And when I see this to begin with, it makes me wonder where the baby's mother is. What's happened to the baby's mother? Is she dead? Why is this little girl, and by small girl I kind of envisage somebody maybe 10 maximum, why is she in charge of this baby without any parents around? And we draw the conclusion probably that mum is dead, or possibly in some other way incapable of looking after the child. We've got this sibilant. She saw me seeing her, my finger pressed, very hissy, and it creates that uneasy feeling. And we've also got the first full stop of the whole poem, and I think that full stop might echo the sound of the camera's shutter clicking. So as the photographer takes the picture, there's a click, and there's the click echoed for us in the actual full stop used by the poet. And the little girl carrying the baby sibling, we presume, we don't know, sees the photographer and begins to react to the photographer before the terrible thing happens. At the corner, the first bomb of the morning shattered the stones. Instinct prevailing, she dropped her burden, and mouth too small for her dark scream, began to run. Right, several things in this stanza here. First of all, the phrase, the first bomb of the morning, makes it sound like a routine. This happens every day. It's like the first bus or the first lesson of the day. It's that kind of routine sense to it. You've got more sibilance, shattered the stones, and the full stop, which is we're unused to having in this poem. Suddenly we've got two very close together, which makes it more emphatic, more hard-hitting, I suppose. We really notice the stop there. And then we have this awful moment when she drops the baby and starts to run away, leaves the baby behind, drops it on the floor and runs because she's so frightened for the bomb. Now the baby here isn't described as a baby anymore, it's described as a burden, something that's too heavy, something you don't want to carry, something that's upsetting you or holding you back. And of course if she was an adult, especially if she was the baby's mum, her instinct would not be to drop this baby and run away, but to actually protect the baby. So we've got this idea that the responsibility of looking after the baby is too big for this small child. She has to face too much, this little girl does, too young. Her mouth is too small for the dark scream that reminds us again that she's too little to have to cope with the things that she's having to face in this war zone. Then we have, so this is the way the poem works in terms of time. Is this happened once upon a time, some time ago I took the photographs at Ascot. Last week I was in a war zone and I took the photo of a little girl and watched her drop the baby and run away from the bomb. And then the final stanza is depicts the picture that the photographer takes appearing in a newspaper. And the editor of the newspaper gives it a caption. So it says, "The picture showed the little mother, the almost smile." Their caption read, "Even in hell the human spirit triumphs over all." So we have this idea that the little girl, when she saw the photographer and the click happens, she's done that thing which lots of us do. When we see a camera, we sort of automatically start to smile. And she started to do that. But, and that happens a split second before the bomb goes off and she drops the baby and runs. So the photograph is the little girl carrying the baby, starting to smile at the photographer. And the editor, who didn't see what happened immediately before or immediately afterwards, says, look, people can be happy, people can make the most of things, even when things all around them are hell. Because they don't know, and the readers don't know, the true story. This phrase here, the little mother, that juxtaposition here again of this idea that she's not the mother. We don't know where the mother is, and she's too little, too young to cope with being mother, which is why, instead of protecting the baby, she drops it and runs away. And then the photographer goes on to make a comment about what they have seen, because they know how it ended. She says, or the writer says in the guise of a photographer, "But hell, like heaven, is untidy. Its boundary is arbitrary as a bloodstain on a wall." So we've got this oxymoronic phrase saying hell is like heaven. It's not straightforward. Things happen that we're not always able to explain or understand in both of those places, says the writer in the guise of the photographer. It finishes with this phrase, a bloodstain on a wall, and that makes me wonder whether the photographer watched the girl, the baby, both of them blown apart by this bomb. Maybe they died. We don't know. We're not told. So it then takes us back to the beginning of the poem, really. It's quite cyclical, this poem, because it reminds us that we, as viewers of photographs, can make our own choices about what happens next. The editor makes the choice that this is a happy photograph, a moment where somebody is cheerful despite the terrible situation they're in. And that's how the readers can see the photo. But the photographer says, you didn't see the whole photograph. You didn't see the whole story. You don't know what really happened. And what really happened may very well be that they both died. Right, I think this poem goes well with What Were They Like and Belfast Confetti. and also The Man He Killed. What Were They Like and Belfast Confetti are both about, well, all three of those poems are about the effect of war on ordinary people. And they make us face, those of us who haven't experienced it, face what it might be like for those who have to experience it, who have no choice. What Were They Like and The Man He Killed both use the device of adopting personas as well. So just like this one pretends to be a photographer, takes on that role of being a photographer, What Were They Like takes on the roles of an American and a Vietnamese, sort of asking and answering questions about what's happened in the Vietnam War. And The Man He Killed takes on the persona of an ordinary soldier who's just not really quite sure how he's ended up fighting in such a long way away from home. So these are poems that I might compare War Photographer to.